The streets of Abuja lay unusually quiet, with only a few distant headlights piercing through the darkness. Streetlights flicker intermittently, casting long eerie shadows on the pavement. A gentle breeze rustles the palm trees lining the roads. The hum of late-night traffic gradually fades, leaving behind an unsettling silence. Ibrahim, a man in his mid-30s, sits behind the wheel of his ride-hailing vehicle. His faded polo shirt clings to his frame, a sign of a long day's work. He exhales deeply, his tired eyes scanning the ride-hailing app on his phone, mounted to the dashboard. One last ride before heading home. Just one more. A notification pops up on his screen. Was too busy by day but deserted at this hour. Ibrahim frowns, tilting his head slightly. Ibrahim, muttering to himself. Who's requesting a ride from there at this time? Hesitating for a brief moment, he eventually accepts the request. Easy money. His fingers tighten around the steering wheel as he shifts the car into gear, his gaze flickering toward the rearview mirror before he drives off into the night. The shopping plaza, once a bustling hub of activity, now stands eerily empty. The storefronts are dark, their shutters tightly rolled down. A few flickering streetlights barely illuminate the deserted parking lot. Ibrahim slows the car as he approaches the pinned location. His eyes dart around, searching for his passenger. No one in sight. His fingers hover over his phone screen as he double-checks the ride request. Still active. His gaze sweeps the area once more. Then he sees it. A shadowy figure leans against a concrete pillar near the entrance of a closed shop, barely visible in the dim glow of the streetlight. The figure does not move, does not wave, does not indicate any acknowledgement of his presence. It simply waits. Ibrahim swallows hard. His grip on the steering wheel tightens. The figure steps forward, emerging slightly from the shadows. Tall, gaunt. His clothes are damp, slightly stained. His face remains obscured by the shadows. His hands remain tucked into his jacket pockets. Ibrahim's instincts scream at him. Something is off. Rolling down the window slightly, he clears his throat. You requested a ride? The passenger nods, slowly. He walks to the car, opens the door and slides into the back seat. But instead of sitting by the window, he positions himself directly behind Ibrahim. A cold unease slithers down Ibrahim's spine. His hands tremble slightly as he grips the steering wheel. Where are we headed, boss? He asks, his voice forced and light. Silence stretches in the air before the passenger exhales, slow and deliberate, then speaks in a low, steady tone. Just drive. Ibrahim glances at him through the rearview mirror. The man's face, partially illuminated now, is expressionless, unnervingly still. But his eyes, dark and intense, are locked onto Ibrahim's reflection. A bead of sweat forms on Ibrahim's forehead. He swallows, nods stiffly and shifts the car into drive. The road stretches endlessly ahead, empty and foreboding. Buildings fade into silhouettes, swallowed by the darkness. The only sound is the hum of the car engine, filling the void between them. The tension thickens. Ibrahim clears his throat. Rough night, huh? No response. His fingers tap lightly against the steering wheel. The silence suffocates. You live around here? Or just passing through? The passenger slowly turns his head, his movements unnaturally deliberate. Does it matter? His voice is calm but laced with something unsettling. Ibrahim forces a nervous chuckle. No, just trying to make conversation. No need. More silence. The road ahead seems longer than before. Ibrahim's unease deepens. Ibrahim's eyes flick to the rearview mirror. The passenger remains unnervingly still, hands still hidden, posture rigid. A thought creeps into Ibrahim's mind. Why sit directly behind the driver? Most passengers prefer the window seat. This feels deliberate. A drop of sweat trickles down his back. Would you like some music? He asks, grasping at anything to break the suffocating silence. No response. Sir? Music? Radio? No. Too much noise already. His voice is barely above a whisper, yet it sends a shiver down Ibrahim's spine. The air inside the car thickens. The quiet is no longer just uncomfortable, it's oppressive. They pass a deserted fuel station. Its neon lights flicker, bathing the surroundings in a sickly glow. The streets ahead are darker now, the streetlights growing sparse. Ibrahim's mind races. Who is this man? What is he running from? Where is he going? The silence stretches like a noose. Ibrahim licks his lips, forcing himself to remain calm. Then, a sudden movement. The passenger shifts slightly. Ibrahim stiffens, his heart pounding. His grip tightens on the wheel. Turn left up ahead, The passenger instructs, his tone eerily composed. Ibrahim nods quickly, almost too quickly. The words, though simple, send a wave of dread through him. He sneaks a glance at his phone screen. No destination is pinned, just an open-ended ride. His breathing quickens. This is wrong. Everything about this is wrong. As he makes the left turn, his thoughts scream in unison. Get out of this. Now. The city lights blur as they roll forward into the unknown. The car moves steadily through the dimly lit streets of Maitama. The atmosphere is thick with unease. The hum of the engine is the only sound filling the air. The streetlights cast flickering glows on the pavement, stretching shadows unnaturally long. Ibrahim grips the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing. Something isn't right. He sneaks another glance at the rearview mirror. The passenger sits eerily still, his face partially hidden by the darkness of the back seat. Ibrahim's skin prickles. The man hasn't given a destination. He hasn't moved much. And the faint, metallic scent still lingers in the air. Sir, you sure you don't have a specific drop-off point? The passenger remains silent for a moment, then finally speaks, his voice unnervingly calm. Just keep driving. Ibrahim's stomach twists. He focuses on the road, but his mind reels. He thinks back on the strange details. The man's reluctance to talk, his refusal of music, the way he sat directly behind him rather than next to the window. Then, a new realization slams into him. He never saw the passenger request the ride. His heart thuds against his ribcage. Did this man even call for the ride? Or had he just been waiting? Up ahead, a police checkpoint emerges from the shadows. The flashing blue and red lights slice through the darkness, illuminating the road in bursts. Officers stand alert, their figures visible in the glow of the streetlights. Ibrahim exhales in relief. Maybe this is his chance to get out of whatever is happening. Maybe he can signal them, pretend to need assistance. But then, a hand grips his shoulder. Whispers, "Don't stop." Ibrahim stiffens. His breath catches. The fingers on his shoulder are ice cold, pressing firmly, a silent threat. He swallows hard. His pulse pounds in his ears. The checkpoint looms closer. Ibrahim's mind screams at him to do something. Anything. But his hands stay on the wheel, the weight of the passenger's grip keeping him frozen. A bead of sweat slides down his temple as they approach the officers. His fingers tighten around the wheel as he forces himself to maintain speed, passing the checkpoint without stopping. One of the officers looks directly at the car. For a split second, Ibrahim swears their eyes meet. Then they're past. The checkpoint fades in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the darkness. The grip on his shoulder releases. Ibrahim exhales sharply, his hands clammy against the wheel. "Good choice," he said. Ibrahim's jaw clenches. He wants to scream, to demand answers. But something deep inside tells him that pressing for explanations might be the worst possible move. His phone vibrates against the dashboard. Bus. He flinches, his nerves frayed. Stealing a glance, he sees the notification flash across his screen. Breaking news alert. Armed robbery at Maitama 8. A suspect still at large. His breath catches. He scrolls down with a shaky finger. Description: male, tall, gaunt, wearing dark clothing. Last seen heading towards Woods. Ibrahim's stomach drops. Slowly, dread curling around his spine, he lifts his eyes to the rearview mirror. The passenger is staring directly at him. Unblinking. The car slices through the thick darkness of the empty road. The headlights barely illuminate the vast emptiness ahead. The flickering streetlights cast long, twisted shadows on the pavement, stretching and shrinking as the vehicle moves forward. The hum of the engine is steady, but inside the car, tension coils like a snake ready to strike. Ibrahim grips the steering wheel with damp hands. His pulse pounds against his temples. His mind screams at him to make a decision. Should he keep driving and hope for a safe way out? Or should he take a risk, fake an emergency, stop the car and make a run for it? He swallows hard, stealing a glance at the rearview mirror. The passenger remains still, unnervingly composed. His face, partially shrouded in darkness, carries an expression of something just short of amusement. He seems to sense Ibrahim's rising fear, feeding off it like a predator savoring a cornered prey. Ibrahim's fingers twitch on the wheel. His eyes flicker downward. He exhales slowly. The tank is nearly full. Lying about an empty tank won't work. His mind races for another plan. Ibrahim, forcing calmness. Seems like the car might be acting up. Been meaning to check the engine. No response. He risks another glance at the mirror. The passenger's lips curl into the faintest smirk. Keep driving. A chill skates down Ibrahim's spine. His stomach churns as his grip on the wheel tightens. A lone signpost flashes past. Police station, 2 kilometers ahead. Ibrahim's heart leaps. If he can just get there. His fingers twitch toward his phone mounted on the dashboard. He'll call the police. A simple explanation, maybe fake an emergency. His thumb hovers over the call button. Then freezes. Ibrahim blinks. His stomach knots. He taps the screen. Nothing. The device is unresponsive, stuck in place like a frozen image. He taps again, harder this time. The screen flickers wildly, then distorts, the text warping into incomprehensible symbols before cutting to black. His blood runs cold. Softly, almost amused. Problem? Ibrahim's breath catches in his throat. His fingers tighten around the wheel, his knuckles turning white. Ibrahim forcing a chuckle. Just tech issues. He presses his foot lightly against the brake, testing the passenger's reaction. The man shifts slightly. Not forward, not aggressively, just enough to let Ibrahim know he's watching. Don't. Ibrahim swallows. His pulse is deafening in his ears. The police station is getting closer. Just a little farther. He flicks his gaze to the road. The glow of the station sign is visible in the distance. Just one turn. Then the hand. Cold fingers clamp down on his shoulder. Low whispering. Keep driving. Ibrahim's throat closes. His breath stutters. The grip isn't hard, but it carries weight. A silent command that freezes him in place. The lights of the police station reflect against the windshield. So close. But Ibrahim can't move. Can't speak. The fingers press slightly deeper into his shoulder, a quiet warning. The station fades into the distance. Darkness swallows them again. The city lies in eerie silence. Streetlights flicker above empty roads, casting long, distorted shadows. The usual hum of nightlife has vanished, leaving only the occasional rustling of the wind and the distant sound of a barking dog. The atmosphere feels wrong, abandoned yet somehow watchful. Ibrahim's hands grip the steering wheel, his knuckles white. His heartbeat thrums in his ears, drowning out the car's quiet hum. The passenger sits motionless in the back seat, his silhouette barely visible in the dim glow of the dashboard. His presence is heavy, suffocating. Ibrahim swallows hard, forcing himself to keep his voice steady. Ibrahim, forcing a nervous chuckle. Sir, I really think we should. Interrupting, voice eerily calm. You don't want to do that. A chill slithers down Ibrahim's spine. The words are not a threat, not exactly. They are something worse. A statement of fact. A certainty. His foot hovers over the brake. He contemplates stopping the car, making a run for it, but something in the passenger's tone makes his fingers twitch. His body betrays him. He keeps driving. The streets stretch endlessly ahead. No cars. No pedestrians. Even the street vendors have disappeared. The world feels hollow, stripped of life. Ibrahim risks a glance at the rearview mirror. The passenger meets his eyes. His expression is unreadable, dark eyes glinting in the low light. Ibrahim, barely above a whisper. What do you want? The passenger tilts his head slightly, considering. Just drive. A lump forms in Ibrahim's throat. His breath quickens. He realizes then that he has been gripping the wheel so hard his fingers have gone numb. The passenger shifts slightly, the leather seat creaking beneath him. The air inside the car grows heavy, thick with something unspoken. Outside, the streetlights flicker and die as they pass beneath them. One after another. Ibrahim swallows. His mouth is dry. His mind races through options, none of them good. He could swerve the car, crash it, use the chaos to escape. But something tells him it wouldn't work. That the man in the back seat would walk away unscathed. He forces his voice to work. Ibrahim, hoarse, desperate. Where are we going? The passenger finally moves, leaning forward slightly. Ibrahim tenses as the whisper comes, soft but certain. Garki. Ibrahim's blood runs cold. He knows Garki. Parts of it are alive, bustling, filled with people and markets. But some parts are abandoned. Forgotten. The kind of place where the shadows never fully lift. His breathing turns shallow. Ibrahim, trying to keep his voice steady. There's nothing in Garki this late. The passenger doesn't respond. He simply leans back into the darkness, his face disappearing from view. As if he was never there to begin with. Ibrahim feels something press against his chest. An invisible weight, something primal. Fear. The streets stretch ahead, silent and endless. The car rolls to a stop in front of a crumbling structure. The building is skeletal, its windows shattered, walls covered in creeping vines. The air is thick with silence, as if the world around it has been swallowed whole. A single flickering streetlight stands nearby, its glow barely piercing the heavy darkness. Inside the car, Ibrahim's breath is shallow. His fingers tremble against the steering wheel. Every instinct tells him to turn around and leave, but fear holds him in place. He risks a glance at the rearview mirror. The passenger remains still, his silhouette sharp against the darkness. Passenger, quietly, almost a whisper. "We're here." Ibrahim swallows, his mouth dry. His voice barely works. "Ibrahim, sir, are you sure this is the right place?" The passenger does not answer immediately. Instead, he reaches for the door handle. The creak of the hinge echoes unnaturally loud as he steps out, moving with eerie calm. Ibrahim watches, frozen. The man's figure is barely illuminated by the failing streetlight, his presence blending into the abyss beyond. Then, a shadow moves in the distance. Ibrahim's pulse spikes. At first, it looks like a trick of the light. Then, from the darkness beyond the building, something steps forward. A figure, barely human, tall and thin, its body shifting as if made of mist and bone. Its head tilts unnaturally, the edges of its form flickering like a dying flame. It is waiting. For him. For the passenger. Ibrahim grips the steering wheel tighter. His heartbeat pounds in his ears. His breath comes fast and shallow. His mind screams, "Go. Drive. Leave this place." But he cannot move. The passenger walks forward, unhurried, toward the waiting entity. The two figures seem to acknowledge each other in silent understanding. Then, they step into the darkness and disappear. No sound. No trace. Gone. Ibrahim's breath shudders out of him. He stares at the empty lot where the man vanished, his mind unable to process what he has just seen. He grips the gear shift, ready to leave when something catches his eye. In the back seat. Something that was not there before. A small slip of paper resting on the seat where the passenger sat moments ago. With shaking hands, Ibrahim reaches for it, turning it over under the dim car light. A blood-stained ATM receipt. His stomach drops. His vision blurs. The ink on the paper is smudged, but one detail is clear. The transaction was made after midnight. But the man is gone. Ibrahim gasps, his fingers losing grip of the receipt. It flutters to the floor, landing beside a faint, wet stain on the carpet. A stain that wasn't there before. Ibrahim's car speeds through the empty roads of Abuja. The night air is thick with dread, the silence deafening. His fingers grip the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turn white. The streetlights blur past him, distorted by the sweat stinging his eyes. His chest rises and falls rapidly, shallow, panicked breaths. He barely blinks, afraid that if he looks away from the road for even a second, something will appear in his backseat. The city feels different. Hollow. The buildings loom like silent watchers, indifferent to his terror. The streets, normally alive even at this hour, are devoid of life. There is no late-night traffic, no pedestrians, no distant hum of conversations. Just Ibrahim, the roar of his engine, and the suffocating fear pressing down on him like a vice. The blood-stained ATM receipt sits on the passenger seat, mocking him. The timestamp, past midnight, burns into his mind. His mouth is dry, his pulse erratic. Every muscle in his body screams at him to keep driving, to not stop until he is somewhere safe. The police station. His only option. His foot presses harder on the accelerator. Ibrahim's car jerks to a halt in front of the dimly lit police station. He barely remembers parking before he throws open the door and stumbles out. His legs feel weak, his stomach twisted into knots. He rushes toward the entrance, past the officers stationed outside, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The officers exchange glances, surprised by his disheveled state. One of them, a young constable, steps forward. The fluorescent lights inside buzz faintly. The air is thick with stale coffee and paper. Ibrahim leans on the counter, struggling to steady his shaking hands. His throat is tight as if something invisible is squeezing around it. The officers listen as he speaks, rushed, frantic words tumbling out of his mouth. He tells them everything. The ride request. The silent passenger. The abandoned building. The thing waiting in the shadows. The vanishing. The receipt. He reaches into his pocket, pulls out the crumpled slip of paper and slams it onto the counter. Silence. The officers glance at each other. Some shift uncomfortably. Others smirk, unconvinced. Ibrahim sees it, the disbelief in their eyes. They think he's delirious, that he's making it up. A taxi driver overworked and sleep-deprived, caught in the grip of paranoia. One of them sighs, shaking his head. Another scribbles something down in a logbook, barely looking up. The young constable mutters something about checking CCTV footage from the ATM location. if only to humor him. Ibrahim's hands clench into fists. He wants to scream at them to make them understand that something is wrong. That something unnatural is walking the streets of Abuja. That he was in its presence. But his words catch in his throat. He realizes that even if he says more, they will not believe him. The only thing left to do is wait. A dark room filled with flickering screens. The glow of surveillance footage casts eerie shadows on the walls. A few officers huddle around as the security footage from the ATM robbery loads on the main screen. Ibrahim stands in the doorway, arms crossed tightly over his chest, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. The video begins playing. A grainy black and white recording of an ATM booth. The timestamp confirms it. This was taken after midnight. A shadow appears at the edge of the screen. A figure moves forward. Ibrahim stiffens. It's him. The passenger. His tall, gaunt frame. The same damp, stained clothes. The same unnerving stillness. He approaches the ATM, his head tilting slightly as though listening to something unseen. He makes a withdrawal, then turns and stares directly into the camera. Ibrahim's stomach twists violently. He sucks in a breath. The man's eyes are wrong. Even through the low-resolution footage, something about them is unnatural. Too dark. Too deep. Like looking into a void. The screen flickers. For a split second, the footage distorts. And in that moment, something stands behind the man. A shadowy figure. Twisted, shifting. A shape that should not exist. Then the video resumes. The man turns away, walking out of frame as if nothing happened. Silence swallows the room. One of the officers clears his throat, his confidence shaken. The young constable shifts uncomfortably. Another officer mutters a curse under his breath. Then the detective speaks. His voice is calm, but his expression is grim. Detective, slowly, deliberately. You're lucky. The last driver who picked up that man was found dead outside the city. Ibrahim's breath stops. He feels the world tilt, the weight of what he has just heard crashing down on him like a tidal wave. Cold sweat drips down his temple. His vision blurs. His pulse roars in his ears. A terrible thought grips him. The last driver was killed. Then why did the man let him go? The city hums with life, but Ibrahim feels detached from it. The once familiar roads seem distant, their neon signs and bustling traffic mere background noise. His car moves mechanically through the streets, yet everything feels off. He forces himself to work, to pick up rides, to pretend that everything is normal. But it isn't. Something is wrong. The interior of the car feels different now. The air is heavier, charged with something unseen. No matter how many passengers come and go, the feeling remains. Ibrahim keeps his eyes on the road, but the moment he glances at the rearview mirror, he sees it, a faint, ghostly image of a figure sitting in the back seat. His stomach tightens. His breath catches. But when he whips his head around, the seat is empty. He tells himself it's exhaustion, stress, a trick of the light. But deep down he knows better. Ibrahim parks outside his small apartment complex. The engine dies, leaving only silence. The street is empty, save for a flickering lamppost casting weak pools of light onto the pavement. He exhales, gripping the steering wheel, trying to shake the feeling that something is still with him. Then softly, a whisper. It is too faint to make out words, but it is unmistakably inside the car. His pulse spikes. He scans the rearview mirror. Nothing. Shaking, he grabs his things and exits the car. The walls feel too thin, the air too still. He lies in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to erase the phantom whispers from his mind. But he cannot shake the feeling of being watched. When sleep finally takes him, it is restless, filled with fragmented images of dark figures standing by his car. Staring. Waiting. The next night, Ibrahim gets behind the wheel again. His hands feel cold against the steering wheel. He checks his dashboard. The ATM receipt is gone. His breath catches. He searches the glove compartment, the seats, the floor. Nothing. The last proof of his experience vanished. A chill creeps up his spine. He puts the car in drive and heads toward the city, hoping that work will keep his mind from unraveling. His phone vibrates with a new ride request. He glances at the screen. Pickup location, was to shopping plaza. His heart stops. A bead of sweat trickles down his temple. He hesitates, his thumb hovering over the screen. Then he checks the name of the passenger. And everything in his body goes cold. It's the same name. The same passenger. The engine hums beneath him, waiting. The streetlight flickers above. Ibrahim grips the wheel, staring at the name on his phone. The city glows under flickering streetlights, but to Ibrahim, it feels hollow, like a shell of something once alive. The night hums with the faint murmur of distant traffic, but inside his car, there is only silence, heavy, suffocating silence. He grips the steering wheel tighter, staring at his phone screen. New ride request, WZ2 Shopping Plaza. Passenger, unknown. Ibrahim's breath catches in his throat. His hands tremble. It's the same request, the same location, the same passenger. His thumb hovers over the screen. Decline. The screen glitches. The request returns. He presses decline again. It reappears. Again. And again. His heartbeat pounds in his ears. His fingers tighten around the phone. He closes the app. Opens it. The request is still there. The air inside the car thickens. The dashboard lights flicker, the engine hums a little louder, and for a moment, it feels like the vehicle is breathing. Ibrahim slams his phone onto the passenger seat, his pulse erratic. He grips the wheel and drives. He will not accept. He will not go back there. He pulls into his usual parking space, killing the engine. The street is eerily quiet. The glow from a distant street lamp barely illuminates the lot, casting long, stretching shadows across the pavement. He exhales, trying to shake the tension knotting his chest. His fingers linger on the key in the ignition. He doesn't want to step out just yet. Then his phone buzzes. New ride request, WZ2 Shopping Plaza. His stomach clenches. He grabs the phone, heart hammering. He turns it off. The screen goes black. Silence. The only sound is the faint hum of the cooling engine. The night stretches on, pressing against the windows. Then a shadow moves outside the car. A shape. Unmoving. Watching. Ibrahim freezes, his body locking up. His breathing slows, as if the slightest movement would alert whatever stands beyond the glass. He doesn't want to look, but something inside him forces him to. Through the windshield, under the dim glow of the flickering street lamp, a figure stands perfectly still. Tall, gaunt, motionless. The passenger. His damp, stained clothes hang off his frame. His head is tilted slightly, his hollow eyes locked onto Ibrahim through the glass. Unblinking, unmoving. The night around them is utterly silent. Not even the wind dares to stir. The air grows thick, pressing down on Ibrahim's chest. His hand trembles as it reaches for the door lock. Click. The passenger does not move. The shadows stretch unnaturally behind him, too long, too deep. Ibrahim's breath comes shallow. His skin crawls with an unbearable awareness. The weight of something unseen, something wrong, fills the space between them. Then, the streetlight flickers and dies. Darkness swallows the lot. Ibrahim gasps. His fingers scramble for the keys. Turn the engine back on. Get out of here. No. The dashboard lights flicker as he turns the key. But the engine does not start. His breath shudders. His fingers turn numb. His pulse pounds in his throat. He looks back up. The passenger is still there. Closer. The air is thick, heavy with a presence that cannot be seen but is deeply felt. The street lamp flickers, casting jagged shadows across the pavement. Ibrahim's breath is uneven, his fingers trembling as they lock the doors. The metallic click echoes through the stillness like a final act of defiance. He keeps his gaze locked on the figure outside, its unmoving stance more terrifying than any violent motion. The passenger's clothes, still damp and stained, seem to absorb the dim light rather than reflect it. The moment drags on, stretching the silence into an unbearable tension. Then, a blink, and the figure is gone. Ibrahim's breath catches in his throat. His vision darts to the side mirrors, then to the rear view. Nothing. His pulse thunders in his ears as he fights the overwhelming sense that he is still being watched. He grips the wheel, turning the key so hard it nearly snaps. The car speeds down the empty roads, buildings warping into streaks of dull neon through his panicked vision. The streetlights seem dimmer, as if the city itself is being swallowed by something unseen. The lines of reality blur. He focuses only on the road, forcing himself to drive faster, ignoring the nagging feeling that he is no longer alone in the car. The police station. That is the only place that makes sense. The vehicle jerks to a stop, tires screeching against the pavement. Ibrahim stumbles out, the cold air biting into his damp skin. The station glows faintly, sterile and detached from the nightmare. Stumbles out, the cold air biting into his damp skin. The station glows faintly, sterile and detached from the nightmare unraveling around him. His steps are unsteady as he pushes through the doors. The room hums with dim fluorescent light, buzzing softly overhead. Officers look up, their expressions shifting from mild irritation to confusion. Ibrahim sways slightly, struggling to form words that will make sense of the impossible. The officer at the desk frowns, flipping through a file, his movements deliberate, measured. He glances back up, expression unreadable. Then he speaks. "That suspect. We caught him 2 days ago. He's been in custody." The words crash into Ibrahim like a physical blow. His mind seizes, the walls of reality crumbling under the weight of their implication. No, that's wrong. He felt the passenger's presence. He saw him, picked him up, watched him vanish into the darkness. But the officer's eyes do not waver. Their reality is firm, tangible. And yet, Ibrahim's own has become something else entirely, distorted, twisted into a loop he cannot escape. His hands go numb, his breath shallow. The floor beneath him seems to shift, the world tilting on an axis that no longer belongs to him. He turns. The car sits where he left it, bathed in the eerie yellow glow of the street lamp. Everything feels too still, as if time itself has paused. He hesitates, then forces his feet forward, every instinct telling him not to look, not to check, not to confirm what his mind already knows. The door slams shut. His hands grip the wheel so tightly they ache. His chest heaves, but the air feels thin, lacking substance. His body is here, but his mind is unraveling elsewhere. The weight. It is faint but undeniable. The distinct shift of pressure, the change in atmosphere. Something is in the car. His gaze is drawn, slowly, unwillingly, to the rearview mirror. For a fraction of a second he sees him. The passenger. Sitting there. Still. Watching. His breath halts, heart ceasing its frantic pounding, as if his body itself is bracing for the inevitable. A blink. The seat is empty. But the feeling remains. The street outside flickers like a dying film reel. Then the whisper comes. Soft. Inescapable. Right beside his ear. Drive. Now here's the real question. Ibrahim is trapped in something beyond logic, beyond understanding. If reality is slipping, how does he escape? If the passenger is neither living nor dead, what does he want? Would refusing to drive make things worse? Should he confront whatever is haunting him? Or is the only way out to obey? Ibrahim will be reading your comments. What would you do?